And he was a former client of mine. We worked together at DTIC. He's got credentials, he was traveled. We are so privileged that we took this particular task. And when I spoke to you that we wanted to ensure that we are at the exclusive book, and we said that indeed the book will be available nationwide. And so just come and share with us from a distribution point of view, because with the invention of technology, it's impossible. Thank you.
Mr. Program Director, I stand on the protocols already established in the House. That's proper, not protocol of safety. It's a protocol. That the Modi say, the late Chief of State Protocol was always agreed that you have our principles always saying all of protocols of state. It's a protocol. I'm going to add the third author who died recently. That was last week. Molobi, who will be buried this Saturday in Lesotho. He won a literary award in February, and unfortunately, last week he succumbed to illness that has been ravaging his body. If you allow me, Program Director, let's stand for 30 seconds to observe a moment of silence in remembrance of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Dean Parisani, and Molobi. Thank you. I sounded so serious, I even scared myself. Okay. I'm not going to be political because look at my input as a commercial grade. And I'm trying to answer the question, why are we publishing? We are publishing because during the turn of the first century, Pliny the Elder said to the world, ex Africa semper aliquid novi, which basically means out of Africa, always something refreshing comes out. That was during the turn of the first century. Then you fast track to 1884, 1885, at the Berlin Conference. We dubbed it was a conference for the scramble of Africa, that then dissected Africa into 55 countries, which happen to be AU member states today. That was the beginning of colonization. Then 1889, Joseph Conrad writes a novel, The Heart of Darkness. Then he brutally opposes what Pliny the Elder said during the turn of the first century. He dubs the continent a dark continent. Fast forward 1906, Pixley Kaisakaseme, during his graduation, gives a speech titled The Regeneration of Africa. He's responding to that. But also, a few years before him, there was Henry Sylvester Williams from Trinidad and Tobago, who convened the first Pan-African conference in London. And by the way, he even came down to South Africa, lived in the Cape, and he became the first black person to be admitted as an advocate at the Cape Bar. Fast track, 1963. On the 24th of May, 1963, Kwame Nkrumah talks about the unification of Africa. Yes, there were many other leaders invited by Emperor Haile Selassie in Addis Ababa. And the next morning, on the 25th of May, the Organization for African Unity was launched. And by the way, it was rebranded in 2002 as the African Union. In fact, in the morning when I spoke with Comrade Tokyo, he mentioned something very, very interesting. In 1776, you had the United States of America. Then in 1910, you had the Union of South Africa. Meaning it came many, many years long before the European Union. But in 1963, on the 25th of May, the Organization of African Unity was launched to pursue a continental integration. Because Kwame Nkrumah spoke about Africa being a common market, having the same currency. And that's why this month we are dubbing it as the Africa Month, because on the 25th of May, we celebrate the Africa Day. I'm talking not as a historian, I'm just a mere marketer. That's why Robin was saying, I used to be his client. Now, from 1963, there was a lull, even though many African countries were getting their independence. Until 1918, Nigeria, when a special sitting of the African Union decided that they needed to embark on a structured mechanism to drive forward this integration process. And that was the beginning of a process to establish the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which will be established through the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And this happened in 2020. This means that we have taken 40 years to establish Africa as a continental common market, whereas it took Europe 72 years to establish the European Union. So this is worth celebrating. And we are lucky as South Africa because the first Secretary General of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area happens to be a South African, Nchabeleng. But history isn't a coincidence. There's a reason why the AFCFTA is headquartered in Ghana. It's also some form of a tribute to Kwame Nkrumah, because this is what he propagated for. Yes, supported by other leaders. Now, we are publishing as Brandhill Africa And we are also organizing events as our delivery platforms to say, as Saul has said, and Comrade Delio has said, we need to tell our own stories. Because Africa's story is always communicated through Eurocentric at present. If you look at the broadcasters across the continent, the 5 biggest ones on the continent is CNN, is BBC Africa, is CNBC, is Al Jazeera, is French 24. Only the 6th broadcaster in Africa happens to be Africa 24, and simply because it's broadcasting mainly to your French-speaking Africa. I quit publishing in 2000. I came back 20 years later because I came to my company in 2020. Then I participated in the study by Molobi Institute for Strategic Reflection. And they were looking at the politics of publishing in South Africa. And I was shocked to find that the very same problems that I left in 2000, they still persist. I'll summarize. When we talk about ownership of your knowledge production in South Africa and Africa as a whole, the people who are benefiting the most are the book publishers and the distributors. The authors, the musicians, are only given 7% as their royalty. If a book sells for 100 rand, an author gets 7 rand out of each and every book that's sold. Exclusive books takes 45%. Bargain books takes 40%. Take a lot takes 40%, but on top of that, if Grubin orders a copy, I have to courier a copy either to Cape Town or to Midrand for 110. Which means let's talk the numbers quickly. If you sell a book for 500 rand, 35 rand goes to the author. Exclusive books takes 225. And the remainder goes to the publishing company. That's why we do not have full-time writers in South Africa. More especially that we have a very low culture of buying books. And I'm talking about us who are here. But the other problem as South Africans is that whereas other countries will have either illiteracy or literacy, in South Africa we have the third construct, alliteracy. Alliteracy are people who are literate, but they are reluctant to read. But it's changing with our children. So it's a very huge market. And it's a huge, very sustainable market, because when we talk about this continental integration, we are looking at a market of 1.4 billion consumers. And there's 55 African countries who are member states of the AU. We are looking at a combined GDP of 1.4 trillion US dollars. And I'm saying our children, and remember, we have the world's biggest percentage